All right, so supposedly we are live here to talk about Dark Tower. So thank you everybody who is either watching this on the replay or who is joining us live. But first, I have to thank everybody who has showed up to talk Dark Tower on a super short notice. Within like 2 days short notice, I was like, hey, you guys want to talk Dark Tower? Yeah, sure. So please, everybody, make sure you are subscribing to these individuals, and I'm going to go ahead and let them introduce themselves, starting with, hold on, this guy. This guy?
Okay.
That guy.
Me?
That
All righty. So, hey, everybody, I'm Chaz. My channel is Bookish Chaz, and I do lots of fun content, mostly fantasy, some sci-fi, mystery, thrillers, all that good stuff, book reviews, book tags. You know, everything that everybody likes on BookTube, I probably do, but hey, I'm glad to be here. I'm so excited.
Who's next?
Apparently you, Joanna.
Go ahead, Joanna.
Hello, friends. I'm Joanna, and I'm just super excited to be here. I guess I am an exception to the 2-day notice because Andrew and I picked up Wizard and Glass around the same time. And I think it was around that time that you and I talked about, hey, we should have a discussion. And I didn't honestly think I would keep up with Andrew's pace. I thought there's no way I'm going to keep up with Andrew because I've been reading like one book a year. But I suddenly got some momentum going when I got to book 5. And then the next thing I knew we were kind of more or less on the same page almost. So it worked out. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Hi, I'm Sarah, also with Silent H, and I'm also happy to be here. I want to show off my Dark Tower sweater. So I never am right in the camera, but I came appropriately attired for this chat. And it's been a while since I read the Dark Tower. I read up to book 4 last year and then just fell off my reread. So I did try to refresh myself on some details. Like some things obviously really stand out, but I just wanted to make sure that I had some of the details from books 5, 6, and 7 straight as well, so that I can keep up with everybody else in the chat.
Yeah.
Yeah. So speaking of chat, we're going to kind of do a more of a general section here at the beginning that's mostly non-spoiler for people who kind of want to know our thoughts when we read it, you know, our general thoughts and feelings and who our favorite content member is. And then we will move on into a full spoiler discussions afterward. Now I know for me, this was technically my second time across the beam. The last time I read this was a decade and a half ago, and I only made it to Song of Susanna, and then I DNF'd it for some strange reason that apparently, like, my memory tells me, like, a thing happened, and then that never happens in the series, so I don't know what I'm remembering. But Jazz, when did you last read the series?
I actually just recently finished the series in May, I believe it was. Yeah, and it took me a while. I read the first book. Well, I've been on BookTube 3 years, and I read the first book before I started BookTube, and it took me so long to get back to it because the first book was not totally my cup of tea. I mean, I enjoyed it, but it wasn't great for me. So, but yeah, I have a storied history of taking breaks with the tower. So I'm finally finished with it, including Salem's Lot, and yeah, loving it.
All right, and Sarah, you said you read through book 4 last year.
I read books 1 through 4 last year as a reread. I've had really like scattered Dark Tower rereading. I've probably read The Gunslinger 10 times. I love it. It's one of my favorite books. Even if it was just a standalone, it would be one of my favorite books of all time. And it's probably my favorite book of the 7, tied with Wizard and Glass, or maybe edges Wizard and Glass out sometimes. So I've read that one a bunch. I've read The Drawing of the Three many times. Like I've often read books 1 and 2 as a little pocket together, but I have only read through all 7 once. I reread books 1 through 5 in anticipation of 6 and 7 being released. So I've read them all different amounts of times, but I have only read book 7 once.
So this is your, so if you're Alan, this is your Malazan.
Kind of, except I love the Dark Tower, and I have it on good authority that Alan hates Malazan.
What? He doesn't even know.
And she gets thrown.
He lies.
I'm kidding. I'm
Matt
kidding.
and
But I think
Jeremy
I
was
do
able
like
to
Dark
join
Tower
us.
more than he likes that.
And Joanna, me and you, well, this was your first time through, correct?
Yes. So I started the series back in 2019. I started the Gunslinger. And actually, my brother is the one. I actually come from a family of Stephen King fans, actually. So both my brothers, and both my parents have read tons of King. And one of my brothers is a huge Dark Tower fan. They've all read different Stephen King books, too. That's the interesting thing, with some crossover. But he had read the Dark Tower, I think, when they were coming out. And he just had told me for years and years, he said, you should read the Dark Tower series. You should read the Dark Tower series. And he could really pitch a book. He should be on BookTube. But for whatever reason, I just didn't get to it until much later. And then when I read the first book, I liked it okay. But I don't know. I just think at the time I was more interested in I was just barely getting back into fantasy. And so I really was craving more classic traditional fantasy. And this is obviously not your traditional fantasy. So it wasn't that I thought it was a bad book. It just wasn't fitting the flavor of fantasy I was looking for at the time. So I didn't pick up the second book until much later, until a year later, once I heard there was like time travel in it. And then I got really excited because I love time travel. And so then after book 2, I thought, okay, this is really interesting. Let's continue. So I did take my time. I read book 1 in 2019, book 2 in 2020, book 3 in 2021. And then, like I said, this year, I just suddenly got some sort of weird momentum and finished off the series, including the novella, the 4.5.
Okay, so Wind Through the Keyhole. Is Wind Through the Keyhole technically a novella? It's technically a full-length novel, isn't it?
Oh, is it? I don't know.
I think it's like over 200 pages.
I mean, let's see. I'll go get it.
I don't know what counts as a
Sarah's like,
novella.
I've got it on hand.
I would think that's novella length, but I mean, us fantasy readers, we count things under 300 pages.
Novella is such a weird little. It's hard to define.
It's hard
My
to
book is
define.
307 pages.
Okay, so technically, I would say that is a full-length novel.
Okay,
That's
full-length
nice,
novel. Yeah, that counts.
So, everybody's brought up things I want to talk about. So, Joanna, because you mentioned that like it's a flavor of fantasy that's not quite for everybody. One of the things that I really only thought about when I filmed my kind of non-spoiler Dark Tower thoughts was just it's such a mashup of different genres. There's sci-fi, there's metafiction, there's fantasy, there's western. There is just all sorts of stuff thrown in, and each book doesn't necessarily have all of those elements, which is why I think Dark Tower ends up being such a mixed bag for a lot of people, and why everybody also has a different favorite book. Because it's also got horror elements. I mean, it's Stephen King, of course, it's got horror elements. Because ew. At least that's how I react to Wizard and Glass. That's my unpopular opinion.
It is.
But,
very
Yeah, it is. It's my favorite book in the series.
I am
one of
very
mine
much
too.
in love with Drawing of the Three, The Wastelands, Wolves of the Kala, which is an unpopular opinion, and I really enjoyed Song of Susanna as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So like
did
everybody's
too.
got their favorites. So kind of which elements, I guess, is everybody's favorite, and also which book?
Oh.
Of course, Sarah said Gunslinger, which is just inherently wrong. No, I'm just kidding.
Well,
It's because I like the Western vibe, right? So I like Westerns, and I like the Western ambiance, I guess, that comes out of the Gunslinger. I also think there's a lot of things about the Gunslinger that I like. So there is a coming of age element. So we get to see young Roland, and I love young Roland. There is the animal companion in the hawk. So I love that part as well. I love the vignettes. Like I like seeing all of these different places and all of these different timelines. And I think that some of the really emotional moments in the Gunslinger are some of the best emotional moments in the whole series. And it's weird. I like things that are weird. That's why this is my favorite fantasy series, because it's out there. And Gunslinger is arguably like the most feverish of the 7 books.
Yeah.
Wizard and Glass gets really weird.
Wizard and Glass is weird too. Yeah.
And so is Dark Tower, the final book. But anyway.
So I can say that Wizard and Glass was my favorite, and it was an easy favorite for me because I have a weakness for forbidden love, that forbidden love trope, and the fact that it has kind of like a Romeo and Juliet sort of illusion there, even opens up with a Romeo and Juliet quote. And it's also a framed narrative. So you have like a story within a story. And I really liked that. And it's more, it was partly that. It was partly also the Western vibe, like what Sarah said. I totally agree with you, Sarah. I just feel like the way King did Western, it felt so immersive to me. He really created such a strong sense of atmosphere, not just in the Western settings too, but even in the modern settings, that I just felt completely, I don't know, just completely immersed in the story. And I loved it. And I loved how in that particular book, without giving away spoilers, of course, it's sort of like you're around a campfire and you're hearing Roland's backstory. And at a certain point, I felt like I was one with the quartet because I was lost in Roland's backstory. I was so in love with this love story. And at the same time, when we came back out into the sort of frame narrative part, back with the quartet, I felt bonded with them and they felt bonded to him even more. And just feeling that togetherness with the quartet and their togetherness with each other, that sense of bonding was just so special for me. I don't know if I've ever experienced anything quite like that in a book before. But at the same time, there are so many wonderful moments throughout the series. It's so many moments in the first few books and Drawing of the Three that were just incredible and amazing dreamlike sequences, for lack of a better way of describing it. And then even in the end of the series, just moments that like literally brought me to tears in Song of Susanna even. So I enjoyed a lot of moments throughout the series, but definitely Wizard and Glass was my favorite.
I do love Wizard and Glass too, Joanna. It is up there for favorite. And the first, I think it hit a little bit differently the second time I read it. So I read it for the first time when I was like 13. So the love story at that time was peak. I couldn't even, like, I thought about it for so long. And I'm pretty sure I read Wizard and Glass and then read it immediately again afterward because the fifth one wasn't out yet when I read Wizard and Glass. We were just waiting. I think the fifth one had been announced and my dad was looking forward to it. And so I read the other ones then in anticipation of book 5 coming out. But the love story definitely hit. Reading it, like going back, I'm like, maybe I'm not as into it this time as I was when I was younger. But I still really love the young quartet, the group of friends from Wizard and Glass. It's so good. I would love to read many books about them.
Yes.
And what about you, Chaz?
Oh, it's really tough for me. I would have to say that I really love Wizard and Glass. It is one of my favorites of the series, but I think I love Wolves of the Column more. That's probably my favorite of the series. And there were just so many. I love the pop culture stories that are woven into Wolves of the Column and also Wizard and Glass. We get a little bit of stuff in there too. But I think even more so in Wolves of the Kala and the way it takes the pop culture reference but twists it to make it kind of make sense with part of the story that they're telling. I thought it was just brilliantly done, and I also liked Wolves of the Kala better, I think, because I had read Salem's Lot, and I was very, very heavily invested in the particular character that crosses over. So that just really brought it home for me. But like I was when I realized where they were going in terms of allusions to the Palantirs from Lord of the Rings, I'm like, oh, this is where it gets really good for me. So yeah, Wolves of the Kala with Wizard and Glass is a close second.
So in defense of Wizard and Glass, I will give Wizard and Glass some props. It's got, like Joanna says, a great nested narrative. I do like those elements. It's got great character work. It's got great forbidden love, great Western elements. I think for me, what spoiled Wizard and Glass was those specific horror elements that just randomly pop out of nowhere that kind of just give me the willies And I wasn't prepared for it because those don't really appear in that particular way throughout really the rest of the Dark Tower. And so it kind of jumps out at you and you're kind of unprepared for it. People licking cats or pervy old mayors, things of that nature just kind of jump out at you. And almost like I felt like it could have been done a little bit way to make it flow with the tone of the series. Although I know we're dealing with a different time. And so I loved all of the elements of Wizard and Glass, just not the horror elements because there's not really a whole lot of horror within the series except in Wizard and Glass. At least I feel. It's the most horror of the Dark Tower.
So I have a question. If Rhea wasn't in Wizard and Glass, would you like him more? Is it just like if we take her?
Oh my God, yes.
out,
I would have probably liked Wizard and Glass 3 to 4 times more.
Yeah.
So
I-
most of the scenes you
Rita
have
was
problem
one of
with.
the most interesting characters to me in Wizard and Glass. Like she was one of my favorite elements. But I like witches. I like that whole thing. So like, you know, with Rhea's part of it, I'm like, oh yeah, this is great stuff. So
Yeah,
Well,
people are mentioning in the chat too, Elaine and Cuthbert. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing their names. Cuthbert, thank you. But those were fantastic characters introduced in that book as well. But I have to admit that it was funny because I read the book and I honestly did. I mean, I did enjoy Rhea's character because she kind of reminds me of Mad Madam Mim and Sword in the Stone. Just like her. Yes. But at
and
the
I haven't
same
watched
time,
that in
like,
forever, but you're right. I think, yeah, from what I remember. Yeah.
I watched that a couple of years ago. It was a lot shorter than I remembered.
it is shorter. It's like, I hate sunshine. Sunshine. I just watched it recently. Sorry. One of my favorite characters ever. But yeah, but at the same time, after hearing your criticism, Sandra, I'm like, oh man, I feel like such a pervert, but I didn't like it as much as you did. Because she was pretty horrible. I mean, you're absolutely right.
Well, okay, so my complaints are just not to make anybody feel like a perv or anything like that. But
well, I think it's partly that Stephen King just goes there, and
yes,
I just expect him to go there, and so I don't even think twice when I read about it. When he does it, I'm just like, okay, Stephen King. And then later on, when people like you bring that stuff up, I'm like, oh yeah, I wonder if I give him too much of a pass. Like if another author did that, if maybe the red siren would go off more or something. But I don't know.
The dark sexuality is definitely a theme in Wizard and Glass, though. It is that.
It is,
and I know like looking at it through a modern lens is also kind of creepy because they're only 14 in Wizard and Glass, but they're adults by the standards of their society that they live in, like that time, that place, that fantasy world, like they have passed into adulthood. They are doing the things that we would expect much older people to do now in this time. But it is weird, and it is part of that, like that sexual discovery is part of what Wizard and Glass is.
And I hear everything you're saying, and maybe next time I won't do the audiobook because I think that one was Frank Muller, and he does Rhea really a bit too well. But Chaz brought up something specifically Salem's Lot, and that kind of takes us into kind of like the multiverse style of books. I read 3 books in the multiverse to kind of weave that into my Dark Tower experience. I read The Stand, Salem's Lot, and Insomnia. Did anybody else add additional books in? Because I guess you could read, if you read Insomnia, you could totally read it, or you could read 11/22/63, and then you can just go down a rabbit hole.
When I read them the first time, I had only ever read The Talisman. The Talisman's the first Stephen King book that I ever read. And then I read The Dark Tower afterwards. So I didn't read anything else. No Salem's Lot, no nothing. It was just Dark Tower all the way through.
But for me, I had read 11/22/63 after The Gunslinger. And I didn't do it intentionally, knowing it had any ties into The Dark Tower. And I did read Salem's Lot earlier this year, fortunately. And I did do that because everybody said that Wolves of the Kala spoils Salem's Lot. And I agree with that. But I think, and I was kind of skeptical because if you read Salem's Lot, Stephen King, I mean, spoils Salem's Lot at the beginning of Salem's Lot in the prologue. But at the same time, wow, people were not kidding. He really does spoil Salem's Lot in Wolves of the Kala. But it's not only that, it's that it's not only about like not being spoiled. I think for me with that particular book, I mean, Wolves of the Kala really is kind of like a sequel to Salem's Lot, to the point where I don't feel like I would have been as, I think, Chaz, you mentioned this, like my investment in a certain character who appears in Wolves of the Kala. I don't know that I would have been as invested or as interested had I not read Salem's Lot beforehand. And because I did, I was invested, I was interested, I was fascinated by that.
Yeah. And I'm very, very new to King. Like I'm a King baby. So we
can take that multiple different ways, Chaz.
That's true. Maybe I better rephrase that. But yeah, I'm very much a noob when it comes to Stephen King. So I read it prior to finishing Dark Tower. I had read a couple Dark Tower books before reading it. And so and then I read Salem's Lot, of course, right after Wizard and Glass. And then of course I read Wind Through the Keyhole before I started Wolves of the Kala. And that's all I've done. I'm familiar with the story of The Stand. I watched the 1990s miniseries with Rob Lowe, like way back in the day. I haven't watched the new one, but I am familiar with the story. So I could see the elements from The Stand that were popping up in the books. I knew what it was, but I haven't read the book yet. And I haven't done Insomnia. So,
well, The Stand's audiobook is fantastic.
So good to know.
If you do most for somebody who is so prolific and has so many narrators, just little small side tangent. Stephen King gets some amazing narrators, and most of them are people I've never heard of.
Except for himself, because he narrates They Went Through the Keyhole, and that was terrible.
He also does Needful Things, which I'm getting ready to listen to next month. So, so I didn't think he did a terrible job with Wind Through the Keyhole. He didn't do a fantastic job. Like, certain parts were better than other. I personally didn't really enjoy Wind Through the Keyhole because, like, I feel like it was a treat for the longtime fans of the series, but I didn't see why it was necessary to do a double nested narrative. It just felt like a bunch of novellas that he kind of stitched together, and then he put content members on the front, content members like in the first third and at the very end, and then just kind of said, hey, this is part of the Dark Tower. And it didn't really feel very relevant to me. Now, I could be way off base.
Yeah.
But
I think it was the nostalgia factor. Like, after having finished the series in 2004, when it came out 8 years later, it was just nice to read about them again. So I think that's a major factor. I haven't reread The Wind Through the Keyhole either. So I wonder when I finish reading it and then read that one, how I will feel about it. But I felt the same way when I read The Wind Through the Keyhole as I did when I just read The Law, the Dresden novella that came out. It's like you read all these books and you really want to see the characters again. And you're just kind of happy for whatever scraps they throw at you.
Yeah. So maybe Scott, Bald Booktuber, who's in the chat, you're probably right about publication order only, Scott, because I do think that what you said makes such a good point, Sarah, because I think I was okay with The Wind Through the Keyhole at the end. I had a rough start with it, and that because I was listening to it on audio, and then later on I picked up the ebook and I ended up enjoying the end, but I didn't really feel super connected to it. But I do think, though, if I had after finishing the final book, I felt so emotional about saying goodbye to those characters that I think that for nostalgia purposes, it would have been nice to return eventually with The Wind Through the Keyhole for that reason.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that. And that's kind of like the feeling I got. Like, I read it after Wizard and Glass, and then I was just kind of like, I'm not sure why I did this. And then the more I talked to like the veterans, they were like, "Oh no, it was just so great to come back afterwards." And I was just like, "Okay, that that makes a little bit more sense.
Yeah.
Speaking of, we still haven't answered the important question that got asked earlier on in the live show. Who is everybody's favorite Katet member, and why is it Oi?
Oh,
It is. It is. It's not even a question. It is just an automatic reaction.
Well,
The best Billy Bumbler who ever Billy Bumbled.
Oh.
Chaz, don't even.
I really do love Oi. I absolutely adore him. He is such a wonderful character. But I have to say Eddie Dean for me. Yeah, I'm going with the unpopular opinion here. Eddie Dean is my favorite. So are we able to talk spoilers yet?
Let's wait off a few minutes.
Okay, all right. So I won't say anything. But anyway, yeah. Long story short, Eddie Dean is my favorite Katet member. So
Eddie's wonderful. I love Eddie.
He is. Yeah,
Eddie starts off really rough, but like I enjoyed his roughness. After we get into drawing in Wastelands, he was kind of rocky for me. Like he's very confrontational with Roland in that book. Very angry, and like they're very much they're not quite Katet yet. They don't get along. He's just like, hey, I want my drugs back. And like you've dragged me here, and I'm here now, and I've got my lady over here, but like I still don't quite like you. And then after that, they kind of mesh a little bit more.
He has one of my favorite arcs in the story, and he brings a lot of levity to the story as well. So I think for so many reasons it is why I love Eddie. So yeah.
I think I'm just a sucker for the whole boy and his dog trope. So Jake mixed with Oi is just chef's kiss.
Yeah.
So good, especially in Wasteland.
Yeah.
Where it's just that I love Oi and Jake's interactions. And then of course, not talking spoilers, but there are some beautiful scenes in Dark Tower between Jake and Oi.
Absolutely.
Is there anything else we really want to discuss before we jump headlong into spoilers? We've been kind of going for 27 minutes here.
I'll just say really quickly about Oi, though, is that I feel the same way. I feel like it's just amazing to me. To do a very good animal companion, I think is a very difficult thing to pull off. Even though we love animal companions, I still think it's kind of a challenging thing to pull off. But it's that he created his own type of animal that doesn't exist anywhere in fantasy. And I think it's the way there were slight human-like things that Oi did.
Yeah.
That were really creepy and cute at the same time. I don't know how he sort of meshed together the creepy and the cute, but it really worked.
Right. And he created a mimicking animal that not your standard like talking animal trope in most of fantasy. He created something that's more like a parrot, parroting things back and picking up on certain words, but not with the nuance of pronunciation, because he can't quite make the same sounds as humans do, and I think that just made it so endearing.
Yeah, it's some weird mix of like almost anthropomorphizing this animal, but not totally. And I don't know. I think he pulled it off so well. So I love Oi. I did my own Oi fan art. It's not very good, but I just really adore that character.
Well, with Oi, it kind of starts out like you think he's a parrot, and then like over time, as he kind of meshes with this group, you kind of see an intelligence develop, and then by the end, it's just he's got a beautiful story that I absolutely love, and where I'm like, no, he was 100% intelligent. And he knew what was going on, and he knew, like, he could understand consequences. He understood more than anybody really gave him credit for, except for
very true.
Jake.
Whenever he'd wink and smile, that was thing to me. like, what animal winks like that? I don't know. It just tripped me out.
So are we ready to jump into spoilers?
Mhm.
Okay.
Totally.
I'm gonna throw up a spoilers banner so that people know this is the spoiler section, and go.
All right.
Cool.
Where do you want to
So-
start? Do you want to start with, Gunslinger, or do you want to just jump all over the place?
What do you want to start with, Andrew?
Let's start
What
with
do
Gunslinger.
All
Sarah,
right.
you take it away since it's your favorite book.
Yes, please.
Right. There we go.
All right.
Who's on the spot?
Gunslinger, I think, is one of the most atmospheric fantasy novels ever, like bar none. And atmosphere is a weird word. And I remember Scott bringing this up in Mike's Discord before I was ever even a booktuber. Like, I think he said something like, what is atmosphere? Like, what do people say when what do they mean when they say that? Like, I know what I mean when I think of it, but it's one of those kind of nebulous terms that everybody has their own, they're kind of their own definition of. But if you want to feel transported into a story and feel the horror of the bleakest landscape that you will ever be given, I feel like The Gunslinger is perfect. Like, it reminds me of The Road by Cormac McCarthy in that way. Like, they're both just such desolate books, and they both like tug you in and make you feel like you are living and sitting in those emotions. So for me, that's one reason why I really love The Gunslinger. And I think it's a good introduction. It's a good introduction to the series as a whole because it has the genre blending. That being said, if you don't like The Gunslinger, I still tell people to go on because it's different enough from the rest of the series that you could still really like it. It's just, I think if you like The Gunslinger, you'll probably like the rest of The Dark Tower. If you don't like The Gunslinger, then you still might like the rest of The Dark Tower. But for me, the moment when Roland has to make the decision to save Jake or not save Jake, and he lets him fall, it sets the tone for the whole series. It is like a huge shock, even from someone like Stephen King. Like, it's in that moment, like that part of you is still thinking like he could turn this around. Like, that's what this story is about, right? It's going to be about redemption, and he's going to pull him up, and it's going to be okay. And it's not. And you're just like, yep, this is exactly the tone that he is setting for the rest of this story. And I love it. I have loved it since the first time that I read it. And it is, like lots of people say, it's even better on reread because obviously you get that iconic first, you get those bookend lines of the series. And so when you finish The Dark Tower, if you really love this series, I can't imagine, and I understand why people don't do it because we all have a million books to read, but part of you must want to crack open book one again. Like, that is the feeling that it gives you. And that's why Gunslinger is even better on reread, and why everyone should have it as their favorite fantasy novel. And if you
That was awesome,
I
Sarah.
don't know if I can say that, Sarah.
But I have to say, first of all, that Scott, that was a fantastic question about what is atmosphere. I feel like somebody could make a whole video about that. But I love your answer to that with what the Gunslinger did, Sarah. Absolutely.
Yeah, for me, and the dropping of Jake has so many just overarching like ramifications because of course, is it Wasteland is when we get Jake back, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So basically because of the drop of Jake and the fact that, we've got this time travel element, which is where a little bit of that sci-fi comes in, because we can debate on whether or not it's magical or sci-fi time travel all we want, but then we can just say robots and then we're back to sci-fi. Anyway, the whole time paradox issue that, Roland starts going insane because he's created basically this time paradox where Jake is both dead and alive, and they both start going crazy because Jake is convinced he's dead. And it's just so great. And then by the end of the series, we get to the Dark Tower where we get that strong moment where Roland has finally made the decision. He's like, I'm not going to sacrifice anybody else, especially after the death of Eddie. He's like, I'm not willing to sacrifice Jake again. And he's powerless to stop it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then with the bookend line, it just keeps going. And it's just once you can get that in your head, it's just like, that is when it kind of blows my mind. Of like, is he pulling the same content members over and over again? Like, is Roland Eld cursed, or is the whole quartet cursed?
Hmm.
That's a good question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was kind of my little rant. What about you, Jazz? What are your favorite parts of, like, you know, the story overall? That I'm very much, we're in the spoiler section, so.
Oh yeah, yeah. So story overall, some of my, I mentioned before the allusions to different pop culture, Wizard of Oz, a lot of references to Lord of the Rings, and I think this was Stephen King's answer to Lord of the Rings anyway. I think he had even said that. So, so many allusions there, but just the subtle, mysterious magics that popped up in the book, I think, was the best thing for me. One of my favorite things in fantasy in general is magic, and so it was very subtle at times, and it was very overt at times, depending on where you're at in the story. And everything from everything from witchcraft to, like, just sorry, I could go on and on about the magic, but that's what made it feel so wholly other. Like, when I read The Gunslinger, I'm not a huge Western fan, and I think that's why I didn't enjoy The Gunslinger much. But there were elements in it. I could see the subtleties of magic that kept me going. And it was also very poetic. I think it's probably one of the more poetic books of the entire series, in terms of that journey and how it meshes with the actual poetry that it was pulled from, and those opening lines. So,
and I think King will say himself, like, I was young and pretentious when I wrote The Gunslinger, and I became a lot more relaxed, and I didn't care as much about what I should be writing as I read the rest of the series, but it definitely has that feeling when you read it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really feel like I need to reread The Gunslinger since it's been a while for me. But I definitely agree with what everybody's saying. So I think it probably would be a very powerful experience upon reread, though, especially after finishing the series. I have heard that before. And I'd be curious, too, because is there more than one version of The Gunslinger since he published it much earlier? Have you read both, Sarah? Or just
I have. So I read the original the first time, and then I have read the newer one the last couple of times, but I do still have both of them because my dad has the original one, and that's the one I read. And I have the newly published one, so I may read them together sometime just to see if I can figure out where they differ. I know he says that he just went back and cut out a lot of adverbs, but I'm sure there's other things that are different too.
Yeah, there's
my mom is
probably
always
other things.
saying that he has some quote that the road to hell is paved in adverbs or something like that. So it's interesting just to see the evolution of his writing style.
Yeah. I can imagine that doing a reread of The Gunslinger after having read The Dark Tower would be an interesting experience because, maybe we can talk about the ending of The Dark Tower, because even though he's come full circle and he's almost like a reincarnation, he started all over again, there's subtle differences. And I wonder if those subtle differences, like he has the Horn of Eld, for instance. Mm-hmm. I wonder if subtle differences would make a reread of The Gunslinger different. And I don't know, Sarah, you reread it since finishing the series, right? So
yeah.
Do you feel like that made it a different experience for you, coming off of reading the final book?
I think it makes it more powerful, and it lets you think about the themes of the series as a whole. But honestly, the starkest difference is that you see how different or how much Roland changed on this journey. And that's where you get into this discussion of whether or not you think the ending of The Gunslinger is hopeful or hopeless. And I think different people have different spins on that, because some people feel like the Horn of Eld means that, he's going to pave a different road for himself and he almost attained what he needed to attain and he's on the right path of the beam. And I guess some people feel like this is just going to be an eternal struggle for him because he's never going to be able to fully shed that single-mindedness that defines him. But he is a very different stoic character in The Gunslinger versus what you see, especially like in Wolves of the Kala and some of the moments that are in the Wastelands even. But he's a very different Roland in the beginning. So I think that's the starkest thing, is when you're used to reading him as he is by the end of the series, and then you go back and see him as he was, you're like, well, he already did such a good job. Like, he already changed so much, and he still ended up back here. So it's, but it's fun. It's good to go back and reread it.
It's definitely one of those endings that has tons of speculation. Does it specifically say that his equipment travels with him?
I think his guns are eternal. Like, I think he always has his guns, even though Susanna takes one with her, and then it doesn't function anymore when she goes into like,
it's like a pile of rust.
I think he always has those, but the horn is not there. Like, he had left it behind, and I guess signaled his departure from his friends and, his single-minded path, but now he picks it up. So
right. And oh boy. But I think the way I took the ending was hopeful, just because I felt like the horn kind of signified, okay, he's got one more tool in his tool belt. He's got another chance to possibly make different choices that will get him to his end goal. So I kind of took it hopeful, but I can see where other people would be just totally blown away, and just like, blown off the series, I mean, is what I should say, because it is very controversial. And I love how I loved, as I was nearing the end, how Stephen King gives you an out. He's like, you
can stop reading here.
If you want a happy ending, stop here. If you want to see the real ending, then keep reading.
So the thing about that ending is that, and I was telling Andrew about this. So about 10 years ago, my then boyfriend and my brother were talking about the final Dark Tower book, because my boyfriend at the time, he was like, the way it ended. And my brother said, it's brilliant. And it was so funny listening to them, because my then boyfriend was telling me, he said, now, Stephen King will break the fourth wall and tell you not to read on. You take that advice. Do not read on. Do not read on. It will ruin the series. And my brother's like, no, it is brilliant. And I think they might have even spoiled it for me back then, because I remember getting mad thinking, you guys just spoiled it. And but I forgot. I think I forgot after so many years. Wow. So I was wondering what to expect. And I'll be honest, I don't usually I'm not much of a plot predictor, unlike Andrew. I've called you out, Andrew, in my video. I don't know if you noticed that, but I was like, Andrew predicts all the plots. Like, it's funny, because I got to the end of this book and he was at the halfway point, and he messaged me and he said, here's what I think will happen. I think this will happen. This will happen. Everything Andrew said happened. Everything. So I'm not much of a plot predictor. And he did that with Guns of the Dawn too, by the way. So you are just like brilliant at predicting plots. I'm not usually like that.
I'll say I'm lucky.
But because I did anticipate some controversy at the end, and remembering my ex-boyfriend's response to the end, I was thinking, what's kind of the most generic ending King can come up with? Oh, it's just going to repeat all over again because cause the wheel. So when it happened, I was kind of like, why? But at the same time, I can see what you're talking about. And I do think, I do like it. It is well written. And I think what you said, Chaz, is absolutely true. I think there's a lot, I think it's more than hinted at, that having the horn is kind of going to make the next time around a little more hopeful. Mm-hmm. And I think King even says as much possibly in his afterword too, if I recall. So I get it. And actually King is even critical of his own ending, which I find interesting. So, and I he says in the afterword that he couldn't see it ending any other way. And he's right. I actually, the more I think about it, I'm like, well, what choice did he have? Because
Right.
I mean, it's said over and over again that cause a wheel, and the whole idea of the beam breakers is that, or if I guess what was it, the big bad guy, that if he gets his way, then
The Crimson
basically
King?
everything, yeah, the Crimson King, that everything
Yeah.
will just disappear. And so for things to continue, they have to repeat, they have to cycle. So I feel like he kind of had, like, the ending kind of wrote itself in a way.
Yeah.
And I think I've talked about this a lot of times in different Dark Tower discussions, and I would never want to gatekeep anything. The more people that read Dark Tower, the happier I am. But
Right.
it will never be the same reading it now as it was when the books were coming out, because nobody had any expectations. Like, there was none of this, like, well, you know, Stephen King's going to break the fourth wall, or there's going to be this big ending that's so contrary, because nobody knew anything. Like, every book was weirder than the one that came before it. And there was nothing that anybody knew about any of them. So it's always going to be a little bit different, because it's impossible to pick it up having heard nothing about it. It's just one of those series that, like, sponges in criticisms or praise, and people talk about it whether they like it or dislike it. And so you go in with expectations in some way.
Yeah.
Anyone who's reading it for the first time post publication.
Right.
Yeah. Though I have to say that even with the second book, even though you kind of see the immersion with New York and with Eddie and everything happening in the second book, and I guess maybe even hints at that in the first book, it's just been so long. I really need to reread the Gunslinger. I didn't realize the extent to which the real world blends in with this fantasy world like it does in this series. And I've never read, I'm sure there's probably something out there that tries to mimic it, but I've never read any fantasy series that has done that like this series has, and done it as what I think it did it effectively too. I think he succeeded in doing something really different there. Even with the metafiction stuff, everything. I liked it.
Yeah.
It's
I
bold.
really enjoyed it.
No one can say that it's not.
Yeah.
He takes a lot of risks.
I love that though. I love that he took risks. And I guess, can we talk about Song of Susanna?
That's kind of what I want to talk about, is the big controversy, the big breaking of the fourth wall, the big meta aspect, the big controversy where a lot of people fall off the series. What do y'all think of King injecting himself into his own story twice?
Yeah, so let's get, I've been talking a lot, so I'll go last.
That definitely threw me off. It didn't put me off the series, but it definitely threw me off. I'm like, whoa, okay, so now Stephen King is a character, and we're getting all this like backstory about that, about all his writing and the breaks he took and stuff like that, and we're getting into his head. And I think it would have been fine, like, if we had moved back into the story of the other characters at the end of Song of Susanna. But here we are, we're reading along, we're hearing all of Stephen King's thoughts, and then the book just ends. And I'm like, wait, what? Wait, what about the other? You're going to make me read Dark Tower, aren't you, Stephen? You're just... It was just such an abrupt ending. I was like, wait. I mean, I wanted to get back to the characters. I didn't need so much of Stephen King, but it's
at least you could read it right away. You didn't have to wait 5 months or 6 months or whatever.
Oh, I know, that would have been awful.
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, that would have been awful.
No wonder people are so critical. But then again, they came out the same year, didn't they?
The same year, yeah. It was. Dark Tower came out in September. I don't remember what month Song of Susanna came out in, but it was earlier in the year. There was like maybe 5 months between them. Okay. But that might account for some of the discrepancy in like certain fans really disliking Song of Susanna, because I think if you go back and reread them, this is what I'm interested to see, because I really did not like Song of Susanna when it first came out. I mean, I still liked it because it was a Dark Tower novel, but I just remember being really frustrated. And so this is the main reason why I wanted to reread them all relatively back to back, just to see if it was just the frustration of wanting to know what was going to happen and just having this kind of, side quest happening and then it just ending when it's getting back to where you want to read.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, and I kind of want to talk about what Scott is talking about here, and I may ramble a little bit, so bear with me. I didn't mind it in Song of Susanna. I actually really enjoyed King injecting himself into the story and kind of saying that, like, not only is he writing the Dark Tower, but the Dark Tower is kind of writing him at the same time. Like, I really enjoyed those elements. By the time we get to Dark Tower, though, it almost felt more meta. It was like a bit too much because Roland's dealing with the dry twist, which we think is he's got arthritis. And instead it's him feeling the car accident that, King has, died from at the end of Song of Susanna. And then we get a time travel element. And then paired with Jake's death, as well as like Roland being like, I hate Stephen King and, you killed my boy type of deal. Like, I wish it had been you. And I was just like, this is a bit much. And it kind of overloaded me with the meta aspects by having King come back. And then we have to kind of do the whole time travel thing, stop his death and like race to the finish. And then, of course, we have to have Roland have sex with a random woman that he encounters. And it was just all a bit much there in the Dark Tower, where there was a lot of meta stuff going on. Like, they're sitting there listening to the tape recorder, and the guy's like, yeah, I'm sitting on candy, and this house looks like the house from Hansel and Gretel. And I'm like, what is going on? And so for me, it felt like Dark Tower was a bunch of discovery writing, and he just it flowed from here out to the fingers onto the page, and they just said approved and put it out there.
So it's funny you said that, because I have a friend here in town who's read the series, and we were talking last weekend, and he said that he felt like the Dark Tower series he loves this series, but he said that it almost feels like he's starting with some sort of like fantasy series and quest, and then he starts playing jazz. When he listens to jazz and just kind of going off on a riff and sort of improvising and doing something wild. That's kind of like what he's doing in the series. It's like he's playing jazz with fantasy.
And one thing that, I don't know if anybody here intends to read Insomnia, but basically the reason that a lot of people say Insomnia is in fact a Dark Tower is they're very much talking about Ka in that Dark Tower book. There is a character who the whole mission is to like prevent a cataclysmic event, so this character can appear in the Dark Tower. They appear in Dark Tower. There's no explanation of where he comes from or why he's important, or that all of that buildup is in Insomnia. And then basically he then appears in Dark Tower.
And that's Patrick, right? Patrick is the
correct.
Character, right? Yeah, I remember I saw Mike's review for Insomnia, and I was so tempted after seeing that review. It was so good. I didn't end up reading it, but I may at some point for sure.
I am curious to read Insomnia. Yeah.
Well, I love Insomnia because it's set in Derry. And so it references Bill Denbrough, and it references, or is it Bill? No, which one's the librarian?
Yeah, it's not Bill Denbrough. It's
not Bill. I don't remember. Anyway, it's not important. It references him.
I can't think right now.
It references the Great Flood of Derry. So this is set in like the early 90s. So this is set post. And it's awesome. Whenever we go to Derry, Maine, I get happy. So like 11/22/63, Insomnia, it itself, it always just makes me incredibly happy. But I definitely think Insomnia is Dark Tower 6.5. Like, it should just be included in the box set.
Yeah, it's interesting. So what I'll say about those last books is, I do feel, even though there were parts that I really enjoyed in every book, and even parts in Song of Susanna, there were parts in Song of Susanna and the Dark Tower that brought me to tears unexpectedly, even. And I was actually surprised, for example, in Song of Susanna, how I actually found myself, and I don't know, this might be a hot take, but I actually found myself feeling compassion for Mia, just her desire to want to have a child, and just her story there. I don't know. I started to care about her, and I actually kind of started caring about Odetta, the different personalities in Susanna. And there was a scene in that particular book that brought me to tears too, where Jake and Callahan are looking for Susanna, and they're looking for the turtle, I think. And they go to the Dixie Pig area or something in New York. And there was some sort of evidence there that there had been a musician, like some sort of like homeless musician or something. And he thought that musician had stolen something, maybe stolen the turtle or something. He's like, oh, people are so selfish here. And there was some comment about how horrible and selfish people were. And then later on, you get what actually happened. And you find out that musician actually played music with Susanna, and that they had this beautiful connection. And it wasn't like that at all. And it just broke my heart. Like it was so beautiful. And just, I don't know, because of the music parts, it really just tugged on my emotions much deeper than I thought it would, especially with that song. I love that song that they were singing. And so I was actually very oddly touched by several moments in that book. And I did like the meta parts. I thought they were pretty interesting. Even that, and with the Dark Tower book, I have a whole mix of things to talk about with that book. But I do think that as a whole, when it comes to the whole series, I did feel like the first half of the series felt like, I don't know, like there was something a little bit more cohesive in the first half of the series for me. I know we were just talking about atmosphere and that how nebulous that can be. I think maybe because there was more, for me, a more distinct Western feeling, like with the language, with the landscape, with the gunslinger culture and everything. It just felt a little bit more immersive for me for some reason in the first half of the series. And the second half of the series, I felt like that drifted a bit, that sense of nebulous atmosphere terms. But at the same time, like I said, I was surprised like how emotional I got several moments throughout the end.
Yeah, so the whole kind of dissonance is, a lot of people can attribute that to the car accident he was in, where, he thought he was going to die before he ever got to finish the Dark Tower. And so he kind of wrote the second half very quickly, where he had been then kind of just taking his time, almost 30 years to write the series. And I think it was like, 27 years or something like that. Like Gunslinger came out in like 1977. Or is it 78?
I thought it was 82 that it was published, but it could have been.
I don't
and
remember.
then Dark Tower comes out, I think 2003 or 2004.
Yeah, 2004.
Yeah, so many, many years. But the whole thing with Mia, I was never able to identify with Mia because a lot of where the kind of the sexual trigger warnings come from is we're told very much what Mia's origins stories is. And it's incredibly messed up. She goes out, she finds men, and she fornicates them to death.
Right.
Is the most polite way I can possibly say that. And she just does that over and over and over again until she discovers that children exist and she wants one. And so it felt very much, because her origin was so dark and broken, I was never fully able to identify with her as a character. Now, Odetta and Susanna, I will 100% agree with you.
Yeah. I guess it was, it was interesting because I didn't think I would care about Mia because of that past. She was very dehumanized, as you said. But I guess the part where she suddenly saw motherhood, it was like almost like something broke in her and humanized her in that moment. And I don't know, just the way it was described, it kind of like convinced me somehow. But that's probably.
Are you talking about the moment she kisses the babies?
No. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about her desire.
I'm going to do this motion, and if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about.
No,
No. I'm
And I
not
was
talking
just like,
about
excuse
that.
me, you did what?
I'm not, I'll be okay. And here's the thing too. Like, I just mean like when she suddenly desires to have a kid and starts cooperating with Susanna, and
Okay.
you realize that she actually, I don't know, that she's not really out to be mean just to be mean at that point. She really, I don't know, she wanted to be a mother. It kind of just made sense to me. But at the same time, Mordred, the whole Mordred thing didn't really work for me. I was not
Same.
really into that storyline. Though I guess Mordred, that name, that's a King Arthur.
That's
Yeah.
Arthurian, yeah.
Yep.
I wouldn't have
There's a
even
whole
known
Morgan
that
Le
for the
Fay,
Winter King.
Arthur
Yeah.
thing
Right.
tie-in, which
Yeah.
we're pretty much told that that's where she takes the name from.
Yeah, but it was interesting because I think that the Mia storyline, it was also, and maybe it wasn't necessary, but I mean, I think it was also his way of answering Susanna's pregnancy and her being, I'm going to say raped, even though I know people will say that it wasn't quite rape, the demon sex scene in the
Yeah.
third
That's a
one.
very interesting scene. I wouldn't. I'm gonna agree, and I'm gonna both agree and disagree. I'm gonna agree that she was in fact sexually assaulted, and then I'm also gonna say that she then turned it around into sexual assault in defense of her sexual assault.
Yeah, it's a tricky situation.
It's a
Yeah,
very tricky
it
thing.
was. It was very nuanced. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, she did
it-
it for survival purposes. So I guess like in my head, the way I see them is that, lack of
Well,
a
she's
no
trying
is
to
a
save Jake. She's trying to get Jake into the world of Midworld, and they need that time. It's a very, and this is one of those very sexually triggering scenes within the Dark Tower because there are trigger warnings all over the place,
Yep.
and there's
Absolutely.
also a lot of just horror and weirdness. The whole hermaphroditical nature of that demon, where we find out that, of course, Mordred is the half son of Roland because he did a thing. I don't want to talk about it on YouTube.
Yeah, let's not talk about that part. But I guess I'm just saying that I did find Mia interesting, and just how I suddenly, I guess, cared about her mother desire. But then after that, no, I guess I did stop buying it at that point. And I did not really, I didn't necessarily want her to die, but I didn't really get into Mordred's storyline. And that kind of surprised me because when I was
It
reading
felt
the
very much
Dark
like a
Tower
missed
book,
opportunity.
when I was reading the Dark Tower book, there were parts where I like the Blue Heavens section, and there were just some really interesting, weird, absurdist things that happened in that last book. And I found myself thinking, I don't know if this is really capturing my interest. And maybe part of it is that I haven't read some of the books he was referencing in some of that part of the Dark Tower. But I also kept thinking, I kind of want to see what's going on with Mordred. What's going on with Mordred? And then we went back to Mordred, and I thought, I don't really like being in Mordred's head, personally. So that was
He's pretty much dying the entire time. Like, he doesn't really accomplish anything other than killing Oi.
Right.
Yeah.
That's very true. Yeah, there didn't seem to be a whole lot of a point to him. I get why King did it to kind of further the Arthurian mythos in the story, because I mean, obviously, Roland's whole line traces back to Arthur, and but yeah, I didn't really resonate with Mia or Mordred at all. I'm kind of the same there.
I kind of like Mia's introduction. I will say, when Mia is a mystery, I enjoy her, where she's kind of where I thought she was this new personality that was, showing up in defense of the pregnancy, like she was Mother. So when we first meet Mia, but once we learn her backstory, it kind of all just fell apart for me.
That's fair.
I was worried about Mordred as a character because, like Chaz said, you know that Roland is a descendant of Arthur Eld. And I thought by him bringing in a son of Roland named Mordred, it meant that that was going to be Roland's end. So when I read it for the first time,
Mhm.
I had assumed that Roland was going to die and that Mordred was going to be the one to kill him. And it was going
Right.
to happen either like at the base of the tower, or they were going to arrive at the tower at the same time, or that was where I had expected the story to go. So I just like had all of this dread around the character.
Yeah, there's
I actually did too.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
tapped the prophet. There's a prophecy there in Song of Susanna. He who ends the line of Eld shall conceive a child of incest with his sister or his daughter, and the child will be marked by his red heel. Shall you know him? It is he who shall stop the breath of the last warrior. So I did mark that too, and I was like,
And he
what's
does
gonna
technically
happen there?
stop Oi's breath.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I wondered about that too. So is the last warrior, is that supposed to be Oi?
I think the warriors are meant to be the quartet members.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So very much Roland is very much like father. He's basically their leader, their king. What's the term? Den. He's their den.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yep.
And as they leave him, Sarah, you mentioned this earlier. Like he's very much a callous individual in the Gunslinger, and in Dark Tower, as Eddie dies, as Jake dies, and then it's just Susanna and Oi left. We see a return of the callousness because pretty much everything that he thought he was working towards, this family he had been building, and the journey was almost over, and like he thought maybe he might have like this happy ending, only to have it ripped away one piece at a time. We see that callous man return, and it's very tragic because by the end, when he's with Patrick, I'm just like, wow, he is being he's being more callous than he was in the Gunslinger, because he's very bitter about what's happened to his quartet. Not just because this is the second quartet of his is broken, and I think we see him fraying. We see him like he is at his end.
Well, we see him grieve, which is not something that he has really done. And I think that's what makes the Gunslinger and Wizard and Glass so important. We see him as a young person, and he's already so callous, and he's already so detached. Like he can emotionally separate himself from his own mother, from his best friends. And the only time we see him show any emotion really is when he loses Susan in Wizard and Glass. And other than that, we see him be separate from his friends, and we saw him build relationships with this new quartet, which is where we see the change in him. And then he loses that. And it's really tough to see him go through that at the end. It's a big loss.
So
sorry, go ahead, Joanna.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say the callousness really, I think, is a defense mechanism in a lot of ways, because it allows him not to feel, because especially his return to the callousness, because he'd let his guard down. He'd allowed himself to grow attached to these members of his quartet and to love them and care for them. And then they were ripped away from him, and he's like, okay, it's just safer not to feel. I think is a lot of what that was.
So there were two scenes that related to that really broke me down in the Dark Tower book. And one, of course, was when Susanna made the decision to go through the door. And I feel like she put herself in a position to be able to do that because she did a lot of pre-grieving leading up to that decision, which is, I think, why she was able to go through that door and not look back. But just seeing how hard Roland tried to fight for her to stay, it was so painful. It was so painful. But the other scene that completely broke my heart was the scene, and it's going to sound, you all are probably going to think I'm crazy, but it's actually the scene where he parts with Irene. Irene is that the main person that he sleeps with, right? Who's with him in New York. But I actually felt a little broken when they parted because it says that there was a line, I wrote it down, that like he hugs her, he kisses her goodbye, and it says, then Roland let her go, touched his forehead lightly with his fist, and turned to the door of the Dixie Pig. He opened it and slipped inside with no look back. That, he had found, was ever the easiest way. And when I read that, I don't know if he did this intentionally, but my mind immediately went all the way back to Wizard and Glass when he and Susan first interacted, like one of their first interactions, and you're seeing it more from her perspective, when he's going away on his horse or something and she stopped at the mailbox and she wants him to turn around and wave at her, and it doesn't seem like he's going to. And then all of a sudden he does. He turns around and waves at her, and she just feels so many butterflies. She says she no longer feels soiled from her interaction with Rhea. Everything is just, she's just like so in love and so happy. And it's just this beautiful lover's moment with that. And so for me, it was kind of like an echo back to that, and just reminiscent of the pain. And like you were just saying, the callousness that he built, he built over his own heart to deal with so much loss that he's gone through over the course of his journey.
Yeah.
And we actually, it's not part of the main series, but the graphic novels do cover some of the battles where the Quartet members like die in his arms. I don't know a whole lot about the graphic novels, but we do get to see him like holding Quartet members like after they've been shot, and he's like screaming in anguish. So like there's art out there where we can see him grieve.
Wow.
I have not read
there's a battle of
Jericho Hill.
I wanted to say Baden Hill, and I knew that was wrong. I knew it was still something.
Yeah. But, I don't know. I've not read any Westerns, actually, to be honest with you. But I know that he probably drew from a lot of Western inspiration and things like that. But for me, one of the things that made this series so special were some of the sayings, forget the voice, know the faces of your father, or don't forget the faces of your fathers. And, I don't shoot with my, I don't shoot with my gun, or I don't shoot with my hand. Thank you. The statement that you were making in your video, Andrew.
I had to have that pulled up. It's a whole litty. You'll see my eyes flick over constantly as I'm trying to remember it, because it was just like, I'm not going to memorize this in the 5 minutes I have set aside here to record. So we're just going to.
Yeah, but those touches were I think that they were part of what made this world so special. And it's interesting because, he uses phrases like that. And at first, I guess when I was first reading this series, I was like, yeah, that's kind of fun and interesting. And then after a while, I love it. I've noticed this actually in different series I've read, where they use different types of quotes or language like that, different kinds of litanies or whatever. But it's interesting that after you read a while, the way he uses those things in the narrative to add certain weight to those words when they come back at certain moments. So like in Eddie's death, for example, when he's repeating some of those passages, it just shatters you. It shatters you to bring it into that context of the narrative.
It is one of his most effective world building skills, and he does it well in almost all of his books.
Yes.
He is so good at creating these phrases, catchphrases, words, litanies, anything, and they all feel really natural. And it can feel really stilted in fantasy when people make up their own. You see it a lot with like curse words. Like you'll see fantasy authors who try to make up their own curses. You're like, this is just horrible. Like why?
But
it always with
Storming. Yeah.
100%, Sarah. And actually that's something that with Wizard and Glass. So like with Wizard and Glass, the Romeo and Juliet sort of thing where, I think I learned this from actually a Radiohead song. I won't go into all of that, but I've heard that there's been a lot of criticism of the original Romeo and Juliet play by Shakespeare. Why didn't Romeo just take Juliet at the balcony scene? Why didn't they just run away with each other when they had the chance? And they could have avoided the whole tragic scene at the end. Why didn't they just run away? And so I was curious to see how King would address that in Wizard and Glass with Roland and Susan. And there was a whole scene. I remember I just like quoted it in my journal because I was just so obsessed with it, because he talked about it, like the idea of running away together. And he said, but they didn't, because they remembered the faces of their fathers. And it was like, like I just felt the fear in that. I felt the real mystique of that religion, or that sense of what that meant to them in that world. And I know that sounds kind of cheesy when I'm trying to say it here out of context, but like you read it and it's so, you're so immersed in that language and in that culture. And for me at that point, I was convinced by it. I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't run away either. I would be terrified.
No, it feels powerful. Like it never feels corny in book. It feels very like you can feel the weight, like you said, Joanna. You can feel the weight behind it.
Absolutely.
He always injects a sense of culture, and like the catchphrases in a lot of the books shouldn't work. MOON spells gunslinger. Shouldn't work. That
you can feel like I get emotional when you just say it.
Yeah, like it fills you with joy. Like Tom Cullen, just and you think MOON spells moon, like doesn't spell gunslinger, doesn't, but it just works. And like the fact that like he built a culture that was almost ours, but like enough is different. Like popkins, Roland refers to a sandwich as a popkin. He can't say aspirin, he says Aston.
I love those moments in the Drawing Room of Three. They're the best part of
They are. Yeah, they really are.
And so he's very much like he's a man, but he's a man out of his element. And you just constantly, he tries and meld with people. You know, he's a midworlder trying to interact with people from New York. And it's just like, he's like, is this what you mean? Yeah, that's what I said. No, that's not what we call it. He's just like, oh, well, whatever. But it's just, I love that kind of, I don't know, relationship that they've got going on between these characters, because even though they don't quite fit, they still fit, if that makes any sort of sense.
You know what else I like? Stephen King will carry the painful elements through a novel. So you have Susanna, who's in a wheelchair, and then he'll put them on a beach, and then you won't be able to have the wheelchair, and you're going to have to construct some sort of harness, and like you're going to end up in a situation where you can't either put it on or people are separated. And he doesn't conveniently get rid of those difficult parts. And I think that's also something that makes his books feel really vibrant, is that it has the difficult, messy parts of life that other people don't want to write about. And sometimes it's really weird and you're like, why? Like, we know you can go there and you don't need to, like Joanna said earlier, like, okay, Stephen, but sometimes it's also good to acknowledge that, you know, whether or not he always does it well, I feel like Stephen King acknowledges that there is a very wide range of human experiences and he integrates them into his books. And he's been doing that for a really long time.
That's well said. Yeah.
Right.
There was some talk of Lonesome Dove here, and on my copy of Lonesome Dove, the blurb from Stephen King is on the spine, where it just says "excellent." I believe that's the entire blurb.
I need to read Lonesome
that's
Dove.
half the reason I bought Lonesome Dove, is because whenever I see a Stephen King blurb, it carries more weight than a George R.R. Martin blurb, like at least 100 times the weight, because it's usually not this is the way something is supposed to be written. But
George R. Martin only has the one blurb.
He's got the one blurb. I mean, if it ain't broke.
I'm sure he has exquisite taste, but I mean, he's busy.
I'm poking a little fun here. But so I have Lonesome Dove by Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry, and so I'm looking forward to reading that. But it's just I've developed a new love for westerns, including fantasy westerns, that I think stems here from the Gunslinger. There is just so much built into the Dark Tower as a whole that there's just so much to love. There's some weird stuff. In fact, there's a lot of weird stuff.
Weird stuff.
There's a lot of sexual content. There's a lot of relationship content. There's a lot of genre changes. There is a lot of stuff built into this series, but there is also a little something if you're willing to stick with it, there's a little something from everybody.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. One thing I really loved, and kind of piggybacking on what Sarah said earlier. There you go. That would be a good absurdist take, right? What Sarah was saying earlier about how there's so many hard moments that just keep kind of piling up for the characters, and the way Stephen King does that, I love, for instance, with Susanna. Not only is she a Black woman who's dealt with so much racism and just hardness in her life as a result of that, and felt like she had to reduce herself to stealing and things like that. Not only has she had to deal with that, but then she loses her legs, and so now she's in a wheelchair, and she has that double whammy. She's Black and she's disabled as well, and yet she is one of the most powerful badass characters in the entire book.
Yes.
Very
and I love that. I love how he takes these two elements that would seem to just destroy a person, and nope, she is the most badass person in the book.
Yes, I love it. And even like at the end, when she creates the door for herself, and he fights to keep her.
Yeah.
Even though it would have been a lot harder to take her with him, to the Dark Tower. He didn't. It just speaks to what an amazing badass person she was. Absolutely.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot of strong female characters within the story with a lot of agency. Susan very much chooses her fate.
Yes.
Despite everything that she knows is going to come for it, she is making that choice. Susanna or Detta or whatever you want to call her, very much like she cements after she kind of melds her personalities. She becomes this awesome gunslinger. We've got the female warriors who fling the discs in Wolves of the Kala.
Yeah, that was awesome.
It's why I love it so much. It's very much Wolves of the Kala is the one that slows down. We explore a lot of the day in the life of Midworld. We kind of learn a little bit more of the sci-fi elements, and we learn a lot about the beam and things of that nature within Wolves of the Kala, which is why I like it so much. If you don't like slice of life Stephen King, you're not gonna like Wolves of the Kala.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I really enjoyed Wolves of the Kala. Yeah,
it's one of my top 3.
Sarah, how did you feel? Really quickly, did you with Susanna? Was that an accurate portrayal for you of schizophrenia, or was that more dissociative identity disorder?
I would call it more dissociative identity disorder, but I also feel like he wrote that in the 80s when we didn't have a lot of, the DSM has updated several times.
Right.
He wrote the Dark Tower series. So I think he did a really good job of describing what that is like. And I think that this is the thing that sometimes happens. He does a great job, and he gets the symptoms and the way that people react and act. He gets them so well, but he doesn't always, like, the technical terms are not always, or the way, the way of interpreting that. But no, I thought that it's very interesting, and I think very true to life, because dissociative identity disorder in general, I think, has like I remember studying this for my exam, something a 95% overlap with significant trauma. Like it is very much a trauma-based disorder. And like Chaz said, Susanna has been through a lot of trauma. She has, she is basically forced to compartmentalize in order to endure the things that she has to make it through. So no, I think Stephen King, he writes characters really well. And this is the thing that I love the most about the Dark Tower is I really like found family as a trope. And this is my favorite found family ever in fantasy.
I can understand that, because I am already missing this quartet. I'm already missing them. I was so emotional when I had to say goodbye to these characters. I'm still emotional over this book. I'm still emotional over this series. It was just absolutely incredible.
The Eddie's fate especially still kills me. Like when that
and you
happened,
see Jake's fate
like,
with Oi. That last scene where Roland's in the woods.
Right.
and like always just like ache, and then like just,
Yeah. Oh gosh, that was painful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
I almost wondered if he was kind of laying on the guilt a little thick for the person who hit him with the car by
the
inserting
guy was dumb.
Jake's death with that. But
Yeah.
yeah, it was
He
heartbreaking.
was dumb.
Yeah.
Like should not have a driver's license. Dumb.
Yeah. Well, do you think we covered it?
Well, yeah, we've covered quite a lot of ground. Is there anything anybody wanted to talk about? Any favorite scenes? Let's close with favorite scenes.
Oh, favorite scenes.
Oh boy.
I'll start and give you guys some time to think.
Yes.
So if we want to talk about Susanna and, the kind of dissociative identity disorder, one of my favorite scenes is towards the end of Drawing of the Three, where the monstrosities are coming for Eddie, and Roland's just got like this minuscule plan that he has no idea is going to work, and he grabs her and he forces them to meet, and then they kind of fuse into Susanna. That is probably one of my favorite scenes. It's just so cool because it kind of reflects what some people kind of go through in their own mind. Like who we are and who we think we are can be very different. And forcing somebody to address an aspect of themselves can be very challenging. And he forces one of our characters to do that. And that scene constantly sticks with me.
Mm-hmm.
So that's mine.
Man, there are just too many.
There
There are too many. I mean, I just want to think. I just think about every scene that made me cry, and there were like 5 in the last couple of books that I think I already talked about them all. And of course, I really did love. I didn't really talk much about Salem's Lot, but I really enjoyed that book too. I thought that was incredible. Wizard and Glass is my favorite book, but there were so many scenes in that. Like, I don't think I could even choose one.
You don't like when they call Roland out for acting a fool?
Which part? I'm trying to think of which part that was.
It's about 2/3 through the book, and basically I forget, it's either Cuthbert or
oh yes, that was amazing.
Where they get into the big fight and there's
Yeah.
like, oh, we're gonna have to throw down.
Yes, that was incredible.
I like that part in Wizard and
love
Glass
that
because
part.
they're just like, hey, you're moonstruck over this girl. We've got this mission. Something's not right in this area, and you're just too busy worried about what's going on in her pants. You need to get back and pay attention.
Well, I also love the part too when Roland has a complete switch, and even though he seems like he's just all into Susan and that's his one-track mind, and then suddenly he looks into the glass and it switches to the Dark Tower. And it's he's like, Susan will be fine. She'll find somebody else. My mission is a Dark Tower. That creeped me out. Absolutely creeped me out. But it felt somehow convincing because we know Roland in the present. And so, I don't know. It was just brilliant. There were so many brilliant scenes.
My favorite scene, I have 2. Probably my absolute favorite scene is when Roland becomes a gunslinger and he defeats Court with David. That's probably my top scene. But also when he lets Jake fall, or when Jake drops and he says, "We'll go then. There are other worlds than these."
Oh, yes.
Such a moment.
So, quick question. Do you think that when, that line comes up over and over again in the series, there are other worlds than these, do you think in some ways, because this has become such a metafiction type of story, do you think he references so many of his books as well as other people's books and stories and even movies? Do you think that could be another interpretation of there are other worlds than these?
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure it is.
Like my whole universe of books. Go read them.
Go read them. Get over this.
Probably so. Yeah, a little bit of self-promotion there, I'm sure.
What about you, Chaz? What's one of your favorite scenes?
My favorite scene was when he pulled Jake from the house, when he pulled Jake and more or less resurrected him. That was a huge redemption moment for me for Roland, because I mean, you knew like from the story up to that point that the way he felt about having done that to Jake, even though he saw it as necessary. And so he was getting a second chance. And I loved that. I thought, and that was a edge of your seat. Like that whole scene, I was just like, I'm just sitting on the edge of my seat. Okay, is it going to work? Is he going to be able to save Jake this time, or is the demon going to eat him all, or what's going to happen? I'm just like on the edge of my seat the whole time. That was amazing.
Absolutely. I love that scene too, because it was so convincing. And, we wanted them to have the father-son connection that we felt was kind of ruined in the first book.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I think one thing that we can agree on is that The Dark Tower is a series that has a lot to offer readers in general. If you love, again, sci-fi, horror, fantasy, westerns, there is a lot packed into this 7, 8, 11 book series, depending on how you read it. There is a lot to enjoy within not only Stephen King's multiverse, but The Dark Tower. And I can safely say that I think we all love the series, if for different reasons, because it's one of those series that is just so complex that there's so much that we can love, different aspects that a different person can love or not love about the series. Is there anything else that we want to talk about before we kind of just say goodnight?
No, I think this is a good place to wrap it up.
I think we covered it well. Yeah.
Fair
Thanks
enough.
for putting this together, Andrew.
Well, you got to thank Joanna, because Joanna's the one who really wanted to get a live show going.
Thank you, Joanna.
Thank you guys.
She said, "Hey, you want to do a live show?" I said, "Absolutely. I would love to talk with you. Do you mind if I invite Sarah?" And she was like, "Yeah, absolutely."
Yes.
And then I was scrambling. I was like, "We need somebody else." And I was like, "You know what? Chaz is awesome, and Chaz enjoys the Dark Tower."
And I love Chaz. I love your Dark Tower review, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Wonderful Dark Tower review, as does Andrew and Sarah. Do you have any Dark Tower videos? I can't remember.
Only on the Gunslinger. So I have one for the Gunslinger. I do want to do more, so I will do a series review, and probably specifically a Dark Tower review as well once I read the other 3.
Fantastic. Yay.
Well, I will end the video much the way I started it with. If you are still here, or if you have made it to this point, please check out these lovely individuals. We've got Bookus Chaz, Joanna, and Sarah Reeds. They're all fantastic people, fantastic friends, and fantastic content creators. Thank you for joining us for our Dark Tower discussion. And as always, peace out. Stay magical.
Thank you. See you guys.
Bye.